Hello everyone and welcome to every episode of The Simpsons Reviewed. This time out we are tackling season 6, which I remember very fondly. In fact, I used to regard this as my favourite season of the show, full stop, and as such I'm interested to see how I think about it now that I have the time to sit down and watch it again. So one thing to note right off the bat is that unlike the last video with season 5, I don't have so much to talk about in terms of the staff makeup going into this season because there wasn't as many changes this time around. The writers stayed pretty much the same as they was in season 5 and Dave Merkin remained as the showrunner, so I'm very much expecting more of the same in that regard. And maybe the more settled staff translates to more consistency, we'll see. As ever, I'd like to thank the Simpsons wiki for giving me some information to help out with the trivia here. And with that said and done, let's get on to the ever mysterious season 6, shall we? Season 6, Episode 1. Kicking off the season is Bart of Darkness. After breaking his leg, Bart is forced to spend the summer in his bedroom. While spying on people with his new telescope, he thinks he witnessed Ned Flanders murdering Maud. So some trivia about this one is that this episode is a parody of the Alfred Hitchcock movie Rear Window. A character from the movie also appears, looking at Bart through a telescope. The best moment for me was Krusty's classic 1960s talk show. That's like so random and out of left field that it's so perfect, and Krusty being that kind of dull, black and white talk show host, for some reason it fits him so well. In terms of my rating for this one, the season starts off strong, 5 out of 5. I think that the whole premise of this one being a hot summer's day is very relatable, and the scenes at the start with the family trying to find shade and hide in a fridge is really great. This kind of thing really gets you connecting with the story right out of the gate, and makes the situations feel natural. The entire first act is dedicated to the Simpsons getting a pool, which Homer is basically forced into by Bart and Lisa's nagging. It is interesting to see how the whole neighbourhood flocks to their pool, as if to suggest that it is the only pool in the whole of the town. Is Springfield really that poor that only the Simpsons have a pool? I guess so. It does lead to a little side plot about Lisa being popular, which is decent but not wholly original. The main conflict here though is with Bart breaking his leg. The way in which he is portrayed descending into paranoid madness because of his isolation is both creepy and funny at the same time. The exact same could be said about the third act as well. It's all kind of set up to be a massive schooly audience moment, and they pull it off pretty well. The way in which Flanders acts does make it seem like he killed his wife, and seeing Bart and Lisa try to stop him is of course entertaining. Thank God he never ended up putting Lisa away for good. To complement this somewhat unique plot, the joke started off the season also in a great way. Some that come to mind straight away are Martin's interactions with the bullies, and Homer's sarcastic reaction to Maud in the end. As far as I'm concerned, this one indeed wrapped up in a neat little package. Season 6, Episode 2. Lisa's Rival. Lisa is frustrated when a new student proves as smart and as good a sax player as she is. Meanwhile, Homer strikes gold in the form of an overturned sugar truck. So Homer's rants in this episode include references to both Scarface and The Wizard of Oz. And the best moment, also on Homer's subplot, is him protecting his sugar pile. This one gets a 4 out of 5. Yeah, I like this one, but it's kind of nothing we haven't seen before. Lisa having trouble with a rival is something that is often shown in this series, and there's nothing too different brought to the table here. That being said, there are elements of the plot that I do especially like, such as Ralph's interactions with both Lisa and Allison, and how it changes throughout. I also like the ending in which Lisa tries to sabotage Allison, only to end up regretting it in that Telltale Heart parody. It is very much on the nose, and I think it works reasonably well. Also, it's nice to just see Ralph win the prize and have a nice ending for a change. The jokes overall are only okay though. Most of the good ones come from the Homer subplot, as I mentioned. It's just simple and fun. The way in which he steals some random sugar from poor Hans Mole Man is great, and it leads to some hilarious stuff as he tries to protect his sugar pile from bees and random English guys who happen to be hiding in the sugar. It's just so Simpsons, that whole bit is just so classic Simpsons, something that only they could pull off. That whole section really does elevate the episode as a whole for me by adding some much needed and memorable material. Season 6, Episode 3. Another Simpsons clip show. Under Marge's insistence, the family go over the romantic experiences that occurred in previous episodes. Some trivia for this one is that at the beginning of the episode, Marge is reading a 1992 book, The Bridges of Madison County, by Robert James Waller. The best moment for me is the fireplace in the bedroom gag. That is pretty much the only joke that I found remotely funny. So, this one gets a 1 out of 5. Oh no, another clip show, literally. Yeah, this one was worse than the first clip show that they did a few seasons back, because this one was with a love subplot that felt tacked on. This is really not the best subject to choose for a clip show because It meant that the clips became very long and drawn out, and had no real jokes to show. There really is nothing interesting to speak of about this one, it's just kind of poor and boring throughout. Even the attempts at originality that it did make with the family telling stories is too boring for me to really care about it. Season 6, Episode 4, Itchy and Scratchyland. The family take a trip to Itchy and Scratchyland. All goes well, until the Itchy and Scratchy robots go on a rampage. So some trivia is that clips from this episode appear on the television monitors in the queue for the Simpsons ride at the Universal Studios in Orlando and Hollywood. The best moment for me was the bought license plate. Obviously that's become a bit of a classic line amongst the Simpsons community, and even in the Simpsons games. I'm someone who plays a bit of a Simpsons hit and run and does a bit of speed running of that game. And even in that game it's an iconic card as well, so that gag really has got a lot of mileage out of it over the course of the show's time. So I think this episode is fun like Itchy and Scratchyland? Yes I do, I give it a 5 out of 5. Now, I must admit that this one was kind of on the low end of a 5 for me, but it got there in the end just because it does not try to do too much. It just sticks to the core premise of the theme park and it does it well. They really capture what that kind of a vacation is really like. From the over-the-top rides to the crappy gift shops and the many little mascots throughout the park. I can also relate to the fake itchy and scratchy money that is not actually taken inside the park on a personal level. I have had exactly those kind of experiences at the theme parks in real life. Also, I found the focus of the episode helped out the pacing quite a lot. The first act is dedicated to getting to the theme park, and that throws up some good travel jokes, even if not necessarily all of them land. My favourite among them was the Screw the Audience one, where you think the Simpsons crashed their car, but then the camera pans to them in a hotel room, looking on at a flaming wreck. As far as the ending goes, it's decent. The robots going haywire may seem a bit out there, but it does provide some extra conflict, and they did try to foreshadow it a bit. Overall, I'm not going to pretend that this is the most consistent episode of all time, because it isn't. But there's just a large sense of adventure and enough funny and relatable moments to make this episode be fondly remembered by me. Season 6, Episode 5, Sideshow Bob Roberts. A radio talk show host pressurizes Mayor Quimby into releasing Sideshow Bob from prison. Once out, Bob runs against the mayor and wins, with the intent of causing trouble for the Simpsons. So an interesting fact about this one is that this is actually the only episode that Sideshow Bob appears in where he doesn't end up getting arrested by Chief Wiggum, Eddie and Lou. The best moment or moments for me was the election campaign ads. So come on, this is a Sideshow Bob episode, of course it's a classic. Now I say it's a Bob episode, but this one actually changed up the formula a little bit. This time he's not out to murder Bart, but rather to make his life a living hell by becoming mayor. Honestly, having Bob as a candidate for the Republican Party fits so well, because he has mentioned his political views in the past, and let's say that Bob does line up to that party. Now, this episode does mock the Republican Party quite heavily, and right-wingers in general a little bit as well. But it generally is so over the top about it that it doesn't come across too much as them shoving a political message down your throat. Instead, what it prefers to do is jab at the entire political system, with dumb campaign ads on both sides, showing how it is ultimately more about perception than any actual substance. Now, I'm not from the US, but this satire is pretty much true across the board, no matter what country you're from, and that is why I like it so much. It's still relevant just as much now as it was, 25 years ago. Just to go back to those campaign ads though a second, they are by far my favourite part, I just love them. Quimby's, of course, is a classic, showing how incompetent he is with the stadium collapsing behind him and the old classic chestnut of a line. If you were running for mayor, he'd vote for you. That's just so cheesy that it works for him perfectly. As good as that one is, though, I prefer Bob's even more. The whole Mayor Quimby's soft on crime. He supports revolving door prisons. He even let out Sideshow Bob, a man twice convicted of attempted murder. Could you trust a man like Mayor Quimby? Vote Sideshow Bob for mayor. You know, that's just absolutely classic. No more needs to be said. As much praise as I do heap on the episode though, I must admit that I'm not quite as big a fan of the last act. The whole way in which Lisa and Bart try to prove Bob rigged the election is not set up that well, and it's not really given much time to develop. Not to mention the scenes in court at the end, with Bob snapping and giving himself up, seemed like a very cheap way for the writers to get out of the story. It kind of seemed like they wrote themselves into a bit of a hole there. That is only a minor gripe though, and that aside, this was still a very funny and quotable episode that very much deserves its status. Season 6, Episode 6, Treehouse of Horror V. The 3 short stories this year are The Shinning, Time and Punishment, and Nightmare Cafeteria. The trivia is that this is the last Halloween special to feature both the cemetery opening and Marge coming out of the curtains to speak with the audience. The best moment for me was Homer going insane and his freak out on Marge. Yeah, this one is a 5 out of 5. Come on now, you knew that was coming. I'm just gonna come right out and say it. This is the best Treehouse of Horror of all time. It just is. It just has everything I'd want out of this kind of episode. Part 1 is a near perfect parody of The Shining, that the Simpsons family slot into just so naturally. It is full of great moments like Homer going insane, of course, and Willie's "wanna get sued" joke. It also kicks off this episode's running gag of Willie getting killed, which is so random it's hilarious. Also a special mention to the atmosphere of this one. The animation and the voice acting are both top notch here, and really helps take it to another level. Time and punishment is a simple idea on paper, but they really have fun with it. Homer just carries the segment so well. Seeing him jump from parallel universe to parallel universe really throws up some nice moments. This is indeed a disturbing universe. That line from Maggie is fantastic, as is the re-education. I always feel really bad for Homer though, when he just misses out on his perfect universe. If only he waited around just another minute to see that donut rain. So the first two segments brought the parody and fun, but the final one brought some genuine terror. Nightmare Cafeteria is probably the creepiest Treehouse of Horror segment ever, I would say. The implication that the kids are just being picked off one by one just adds to the stakes. Skinner is really the MVP here though. I just love his sinister demeanor throughout, and the Uta sequence is one of my favorite jokes. You might say we just ate Uta, and he's in our stomachs right now. Things even wrap up in a weird and memorable way, with the Inside Out song. This is truly a classic episode. There's just never a dull moment with this one. Season 6, Episode 7, Bart's Girlfriend. Bart develops a crush on Reverend Lovejoy's daughter, Jessica. However, she soon turns out to be trouble. So, when Bart struts down the street to the tune of Staying Alive by the Bee Gees, that's seen as a reference to the movie Saturday Night Fever. The best moment and joke for me was Willie screaming, "Ya used me, Skinner! Ya used me!" Not only is that funny in and of itself, the guilty and ashamed look that Skinner has on his face just sells the joke so well. So, what do I think about Bart getting a girlfriend? I think it's a 3 out of 5. Yeah, it's not among my favourites. I think the main problem I have is that it's kind of very slow paced and it does not really get going until halfway through. The first act is dedicated to Bart trying to show how good he can be and keeping up the ruse that Jessica is actually a good person. Things do liven up a bit towards the back end though, with the whole stealing the collection plate thing. The payoff to that is decent I suppose. It at least exposes Reverend and Helen Lovejoy as being severe hypocrites in regards to how they raise their kids. Jess herself is okay as a foil for Bart, and it does allow him to be shown in a sympathetic light for a change, which is kind of rare to see on the show. I just don't find her particularly funny or interesting though, which does become noticeable when she is on screen as much as she is in this episode. In terms of the jokes overall, they were decent but no more than that. The one that I mentioned earlier with Willie and Skinner was my favourite, and the only joke which really had me laughing. To round this off, the story is very solid, and I can't understand why some people would rate it highly. It just never really clicked for me though in a way that some others do, which is why I don't really rate it among the greats. Season 6, Episode 8, Lisa on Ice. To avoid failing Jim, Lisa joins the Pee Wee Hockey League. Soon, her team must face off against Bart's, which sparks a fierce rivalry between them. So a little bit of info about this one is that Bob Anderson, who directed the episode, actually watched a bunch of VHS highlight tapes in preparation in order to better familiarise himself with ice hockey. The best moment for me was the ending, which I will get onto more in a minute. So this one gets a max rating 5 out of 5. I really love this one. It is a simple sibling rivalry story between Lisa and Bart, but it's done right. The way in which they end up on opposite teams happens fairly organically, and it is interesting to see the animosity between them grow throughout the episode. I think what helps it work for me especially as well, it comes across as just siblings being siblings rather than any genuine hate between them. That is of course all confirmed by the ending where they end up coming together in what is probably low-key one of the most touching scenes of the entire series in my humble opinion. The flashback to them as toddlers helping each other out in various situations. It's simple, but it's just used so well and executed to perfection. And having Lisa and Bart go off together, while the entire stadium full of angry parents trash the stadium, it is a fitting way to end. Homer is also hilarious here. I can see how some people may think that he kind of veers off into jackass territory, but I just love it. Seeing how bloodthirsty he is over a simple game of hockey is just hilarious to me, and they produced a number of funny moments. It wasn't just Homer that was bringing the funny here though. Chief Wiggum has some great lines, as did Apu, and pretty much any other side character that appeared here for that matter. So it's really had it all. An interesting plot, filled with funny moments, and even an emotional ending. Truly a classic. Season 6, Episode 9, Homer Badman. Homer is accused of sexual harassment by a babysitter. The media and the town are against him, until groundskeeper Willie saves the day by giving proof of Homer's innocence. So some trivia is that Rock Bottom dubs groundskeeper Willie Rowdy Roddy Piper. This is an obvious reference to Rowdy Roddy Piper, the stage name of a professional wrestler. The best moment for me was, of course, Homer's Rock Bottom interview. So what rating do you think this one's getting? Yeah, it comes as no surprise, it's getting a 5 out of 5. Yeah, of course I like this one quite a lot. In recent times, I have noticed that this episode has had somewhat of a resurgence in popularity, with many people making videos about how great it is. And I'm not gonna lie, that kind of makes the contrarian in me want to declare it overrated, but I just can't do it. For what it was trying to do, it works so well. The way in which it portrays how not only the media, but also people in general, have a tendency to jump on the bandwagon without having any knowledge of the actual facts of the situation is just spot on. Also, the way in which it portrays the situation is perfect. Homer was acting like a bit of a doofus to this smart young woman, but of course that does not mean that he is necessarily guilty of harassing her. It is also treated as serious as it should be. The repercussions that false allegations can have on your life is shown in full display here. Seeing Homer slide into depression as he, ironically of course, is harassed by the mob is quite sobering to say the least. It also makes it feel all the more better when his name is finally cleared in the end. The way in which it happens though with Willie's secret security tape kind of comes out of nowhere. It wasn't foreshadowed at all, and it feels a bit sloppy to be honest, but hey, I'm not going to criticise it too much because how else are you going to get out of that plot? The comedy that's on offer here is not all-time greatness or anything, but it's still pretty good. The whole candy convention scene at the start is pretty funny and has a good number of action sequences to it surprisingly. And Homer himself has of course iconic moments like his under the sea fantasy. The best part of it all though, and the most memorable part, and indeed the most relevant part, is the satire of the media. From the crappy talk shows to the slanderous editing and the framing that goes on, it all adds up to a timeless classic, and one that will probably, unfortunately, be relevant for some time to come. Season 6, Episode 10, Grandpa vs. Sexual Inadequacy. Grandpa introduces Homer to a homemade love tonic. They soon go on the road together, trying to make some money off the potion. Meanwhile, the children blame UFOs for their parents' absence. So Al Gore, the former vice president of the US, is shown celebrating Lisa biting his butt by listening to, of course, Celebration by Kool and the Gang. My best moment here was Bart's subplot, the kids all getting paranoid. So, this one gets a 3 out of 5 overall. This never really clicked with me that much, I will be honest. I do remember liking this episode more in the past, but when I sat down to watch it for this video, I just couldn't get into it that much. The main plot, with Homer and Abe selling the sex formula to make money, was all fine, and it did allow for some good moments to get in between them. It ended in a rather predictable way though, and the characterization of both Homer and Abe, well consistent to who they are, was nothing that we haven't already seen before. We didn't get like a deep dive into them or anything here. As I said though, the side plot with Bart and the other kids, imagining that there's some kind of conspiracy of them being controlled by aliens, is very fun and at least there's some good lines. My favourite one of them probably being, "We're through the looking glass here, people." Even this though kind of suffers at the end from being a bit brief and having no real conclusion. It made that side of things feel rather pointless, which is a shame as I personally found it more interesting than the main plot itself. Overall, this was not bad, just kind of dull and forgettable in my opinion. It's just a bit lackluster in comparison to other classics from this era, so it's not necessarily the episode's fault, but still, it never really clicked with me that much. Season 6, Episode 11, Fear of Flying. The Simpsons plan a vacation after Homer gets some free airline tickets. However, they soon discover that Marge is afraid of flying. After some persuading from Lisa, Marge visits the therapist to cure her fear. So some trivia is that in the season 3 episode, Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington, Marge is seen inside a plane without panicking. Now maybe that's just the writers throwing continuity out of the window, or if you want to be generous, you could say that that episode takes place after this one. Either way though, it is kind of something that's interesting. The best moment for me was Homer's antics in trying to find a new bar, including his brief stint as the captain, as you can see there. So, do I have a fear of this episode like Marge has a fear of flying? No, it's the total opposite. I love this episode, and as such, it gets a 5 out of 5. I just find this one very funny throughout, and actually quite memorable for some reason. The whole first act is gold in my opinion. The way Homer gets kicked out of Moe's is hilarious, and leads to some great gags, and even a Cheers parody. It is kind of ironic though, isn't it, that they couldn't get Kelsey Grammer to do his character for this episode, considering that he is the one character from Cheers that is regularly on The Simpsons, obviously as Sideshow Bob. Anyway, from there, the episode segues into the whole family getting free plane tickets. I love that section as well, with the whole Homer becoming a pilot and the whole "we'll need that to live" when he tries to press random buttons. When you get deep down into the plot though, there's not actually too much substance. Marge having a fear of flying is pretty low stakes in reality, and this is treated very high stakes if you look at it. I know that the reason for that is to delve into Marge's repressed childhood memories, but it still kind of sticks out in my mind regardless. Also, the episode felt kind of on the short side, even with the long couch gag. Now again, I don't want to sound negative here because, as I said, I really do like this one overall. It is cool to learn some more things about Marge's childhood relationships, especially with her father, as she is so rarely seen on the show. What I like best here though is the comedy. Homer's reaction to Marge getting counselling is so over the top that I find it hilarious. Some other great lines include the whole Crazy Clown Airlines will be a laughing stock. And of course, who can forget Guy Incarnito? He is the classic. Someone hooked that guy up with Laureen Lumpkin. To be serious for just a second though, it is these moments that help elevate it up to a 5 for me. Season 6, Episode 12, Homer the Great. Homer joins the secret society of the Stonecutters and ends up becoming their leader. Some trivia is that the number Homer is given, 912, is actually a real emergency phone number. At the time of this episode's airing, it was the area code for southern Georgia. The best moment for me was the Stonecutters' we do song. So, this iconic episode of The Simpsons gets a 5 out of 5. Another one that you may have been able to see coming. I do think this one is a classic, even if the story on offer is kind of simple. It's basically just Homer trying to fit in after learning that he's left out of a secret club that seems just out of his reach. The build up to it though is great. The whole "shut up" line from Carl to Lenny, who just can't keep his mouth shut, is a great way to let Homer in on a secret. Once he gains membership though, they do a good job of showing Homer's journey through the ranks. It starts off well for him, but he soon ends up alone again, as he was right at the start. It really was just a simple romp through secret societies, and it gets a good bit of mileage out of that source material. Naturally, it also paved the way for a lot of funny moments. I like Mr. Burns' antics in the club, for example. It's fun to see him in a kind of subservient role for a change. Also, that song is iconic, and really helps to add a sense of timelessness to the episode. Homer may not be allowed into the prestigious No Homers Club, but he helped carry this one to greatness, so maybe that is some consolation for him. Season 6, Episode 13, and Maggie Makes Free. Lisa wonders why there aren't any photos of Maggie in the family album. Homer answers by telling the story of how he used them for motivation after being forced to give up his dream job. So, an interesting goof in this episode is that a picture of Maggie can be seen hanging on the wall before she's even born. Executive producer Matt Selman even referenced this error on Twitter. The best moment for me was the ending, of course it was. So, another flashback episode, and it gets a 5 out of 5. Yeah, it kind of goes without saying that I love this one. Indeed, it is one of the best flashbacks the show has ever produced, on par with Lisa's first word for me. I really would have a hard time separating those two, in terms of which I like best. This one is interesting though because it focuses on Maggie. It gives a more recent look into the Simpsons past that is often left unexplored. Also, another thing that you will notice if you watch this episode is that it's very down to earth. From the emotional and financial stakes that hang over the whole thing, to even Homer's dream. He does not want something fancy or unachievable, he just simply wants to work in a bowling alley. It's such a Homer thing that, isn't it? It kind of makes me respect him more for some reason. I think that's kind of the genius of the writing here. Because Homer is so grounded here, it makes you want to see him succeed. You just wish that he could get rid of Mr. Burns for good, without having to go crawling back to him in the end. But of course, the reality of the situation is that he has to make a sacrifice for the newly born Maggie. The Homer and Maggie relationship has rarely ever been a thing on the series at all, which is understandable considering that Maggie is, well, a baby. But the episode literally goes out of its way to recognise that with Homer almost sitting on her. But it clearly manages to juxtapose this with showcasing how much love he really has for her deep down. Now, of course, I have to discuss the ending in more detail. It is just beautifully heartwarming. It even gets to me a little, and I'm not usually a particularly emotional type of guy, especially not for things like TV shows. The whole do it for her thing, covering up the letters, it's such a clever thing to do, and it really just works so well. It may be a tad bit sappy, but who cares, it's just lovely. Saying all of that though, it's not just the great plot that manages to be in the episode's favour. I also found it to be quite funny. Homer playing Mr. Burns' head like a bongo is brilliant, as is Patty and Selma's phone book gag. That generally surprised me the first time that I saw it. So all in all, this one just had it all. An all-time classic for sure. Season 6, Episode 14, Bart's Comet. Bart discovers the Comet is heading straight for Springfield. Having none of their own, the townspeople head to Thunder's bomb shelter for safety. So the trivia here is that the list of people who Kent Brockman reveals are gay is made up entirely of crew members who worked on the show. A bit of an inside gag there. The best moment for me was the scenes in Ned's bomb shelter. So overall, this one gets a 5 out of 5. Talk about high stakes, huh? Indeed, this is probably the biggest threat the Simpsons have ever faced, outside of maybe the movie, and just like the movie, this succeeds at broadening the scope to the whole town. Despite that though, it starts off in a deceptively calm and simple way, with just some fun back and forth banter between Bart and Skinner, with a few observational jokes about astronomy, and the whole vibe of getting up in the early hours of the morning. All of that stuff is very simple but also very relatable, and it keeps me interested in the early part of the episode. When the comet is discovered to be heading towards Springfield though, the whole town gets involved. This is probably my favourite aspect of the episode overall. The scenes both in the town meeting and especially in Ned's bomb shelter are great. That is where most of the best jokes come from. My favourite being Mo saying, "Oh God, no!" as a running gag, and also the whole barnyard guessing game. The ending has also always clicked with me. Sure, I understand that it was a big tone shift, and maybe the kind of emotional moment could come off as unearned. I just don't view it in that way though. I never knew why really before, but I have to give a shout out to the real Jims who came up with kind of a good explanation in his review. I very much agree with him that it's the continuity of the relationship between Homer and Ned up until this point that sells that moment. The work that the show put into those two characters up until this point, we already kind of know where they stand, so we don't need some massive setup in the first act of the episode. The writers trust their viewers to know the characters well enough by this point to understand why they act the way they do. Also, it doesn't hurt that the Que Sera Sera song is a good one, and the whole end scene is shot beautifully. To sum this one up, I very much like it. It feels somewhat unique in the way that it's structured, and as such will always be a memorable one to me. Season 6, Episode 15, Homie the Clown. After seeing a billboard for Clown College, Homer cannot resist becoming a clown himself. However, he is mistaken for Krusty and runs into trouble with the mob. So the trivia I have for you here is that the episode's name is in reference to a character also on Fox at the time, Homie the Clown, from the comedy show In Living Color. The best moment for me was Homer imagining everyone as clowns. So this one gets a 5 out of 5. The good run continues. And I think it's fair to say that a story about clowns lives and dies by its comedy, and this one certainly delivered in that regard. There's such a variety to it, from the observational stuff to Homer's hallucinations to the slightly dark moment of Homer nearly beating a man to death. The best thing I can say about that scene though is that it was the creation of the "Stop, he's already dead" meme. That meme is just so great, it can be applied to so many different scenarios that no wonder it caught on. The best scene of the entire thing though for me is Homer and the family around a dinner table. I cracked up at Marge's "Yes, homie?" The kind of deadpan way that she delivers that line is almost perfect. Also, the way in which Homer suddenly gets up and declares that he's going to clown college is just as good. I don't think any of us expected him to say that. In terms of what story that we do have here, it's not meant to be taken too seriously, which I guess is a welcome break after the last episode. It ties in the mob to Krusty's gambling problem in a fairly simple way that works well enough, even if the mafia are totally useless at collecting their money. The ending is also fine for what it is. The unicycle callback was a nice bit of simple storytelling. All in all, this was just a fun little outing that showed off Homer's impressionable side to the max. Season 6, Episode 16, Bart vs. Australia. In a way to spite Lisa, Bart makes a prank call to an unsuspecting Australian boy, which ends up sparking an international controversy. The trivia that I have here is that the bullfrogs taking over Australia in the episode and destroying all the crops and the ecosystem is a reference to the cane toad that actually did become a pest in Australia. My favourite moment was the game of Knifey Spoony. I don't know why, it's just so random that it's brilliant. So this one gets a 4 out of 5 for me. This is definitely a very popular and somewhat iconic episode, but I can't help but feel it's a tad bit overrated though. I can see why some people would absolutely love it. I mean, I like it myself, I just don't consider it one of the all-time best or anything. The plot starts off in an interesting way, with Bart wondering why the water drains differently in different hemispheres. But once he gets on the wrong side of Australia, it settles into a kind of predictable rhythm, especially for travel episodes on this show. I just don't find the back and forth between the US and Australia's political members to be that interesting or funny, and it just takes a little too much runtime for my money. That being said, Bart had his chance to shine with the ending. It shows him at his mischievous best, and the ending shot of the koala bear stowing away on a helicopter is a nice cryptic shot to end on. The jokes overall were about par for the course, I would say. None of them really stood out to me. The best, of course, being the knifey spoony one I mentioned. If nothing else, this is probably the first time that I got a chance to see the Simpsons travel to a faraway place, and seeing Lisa and Marge interact with the locals produced some interesting results, to say the least. Season 6, Episode 17, Homer vs. Patty and Selma. Homer loses all of his money and must turn to Patty and Selma for a loan. Meanwhile, Bart is late for a physical education sign-up and has to take a ballet class. So some trivia is that at the gym sign-ups, Lisa is shown wearing hockey gear. This is perhaps in reference to her stint as a goalie in Lisa on Ice earlier in this season. The best moment for me was Mel Brooks' brief cameo appearance. Overall, I give this one a 4 out of 5. So this was a nice down-to-earth story again, with good characterization for Bart and Homer in particular. Even though Patty and Selma are nasty towards Homer throughout, it does at least provide some funny moments between them. The way in which Homer manages to annoy them simply by being in their presence is very amusing. This is best shown when he does not stop laughing at their attempt to threaten him. It also provides yet another opportunity for Homer to show what Marge means to him. The ending where he takes the blame for his sister's smoking, then runs off with the debt cleared, is a nice way to end. The side plot with Bart learning ballet is also interesting and shows another side to him which Lisa even comments on. But for real, Lisa, you just left him injured in a ditch? What is wrong with you, girl? To be honest though, even though I personally enjoyed that subplot, it's not particularly memorable and does feel kind of pointless in the end. This episode is solid without being spectacular, but some decent jokes and that Mel Brooks cameo help push this up in my estimation. Season 6, Episode 18, A Star is Banned. In order to boost the town's popularity, the people of Springfield hold a film festival to attract more tourists. Marge decides to invite Jane Sherman to be a guest judge. So some pretty infamous trivia about this one is that Matt Groening did not like the episode at all, as he felt that it played just like an advertisement for the critic. And as such, they removed his name from the credits, making this the only episode of the show to not have him credited. The best moment for me was, of course, Hans Moleman getting hit by a football. What a classic that is. So all in all, this is another 4 out of 5. Macaroni may have hated this episode, but I find it to be enjoyable enough. I can kind of understand why he may have had problems with it at the time, as this was kind of a promotion of the critic. Of course, at this point though, the show has gone far deeper down that road to do all kinds of different crossovers than ever before. Nowadays they would take it to far bigger extremes than this, just to see the Family Guy crossover for example. Anyway, back to the episode. The plot was kind of mediocre, if I'm being honest. It was just a town having a film festival, and that was pretty much it. If you were looking for a deep plot with tons of characterization, then look elsewhere. For what it is though, it made the most of it. They managed to parody a number of films, and getting some good jokes and moments to boot. My favourites were both courtesy of the legend that is Hans Moleman. First you have the football in the groin, then he also steals the show with, you were saying boo and... It was these jokes, along with some good visuals, that got this to a 4 for me, because the ending was rather abrupt, and kind of confirmed how little any of this actually mattered. Season 6, Episode 19, Lisa's Wedding. Lisa visits a mysterious fortune teller at a Renaissance fair, who tells of Lisa's future marriage to an Englishman she meets at college, named Hugh Parkfield. Some trivia this one is that several of the futuristic sound effects heard in the episode are taken from the Jetsons and Star Trek. The best moment for me was just being able to see the characters in the future. So, was this episode as successful as Lisa's future? Kind of. I give it a 4 out of 5 again. Now I know most Simpsons fans would probably give this a 5, and there does seem to be a consensus that this is one of the best episodes of all time. I don't quite fall into that category though. I don't quite agree with it because, although this is still a fine episode, as I will explain, for whatever reason it just did not resonate with me as much as many others did. It was the show's first foray into the future, and that alone is interesting. It gave the writers some much welcome new material to work with, and I think they managed it well. They also crammed a lot of the side characters in here as well, showing a brief glimpse of what became of them in the future, while also giving a few predictions about what the future might look like. By the way, it is kind of funny now watching this in 2020, 10 years after these events were meant to take place. 2010 doesn't suddenly seem so futuristic, does it really? Anyway, Lisa is of course at the core of the story, and it is nice seeing her and her posh boyfriend trying to mix with each other's families. It also leads naturally into the conclusion where Lisa decides that she does not want to be with someone who does not respect her family. That came right off the back of Homer's touching speech to her. As well as confirming how much those characters mean to each other, it also kind of reaffirms to Lisa why she shouldn't choose her husband over her father and her family. That is definitely another instance, by the way, where the continuity helps out of the series. We know by now what those characters are like and how much they mean to each other. The jokes are fine overall, but this is not what I would call laugh out loud funny personally. And there's not really one moment that stands out, which is why I picked something so general as my favourite moment. That is why I can't give this legendary status overall. It's just not the most entertaining for me to watch. That being said though, I still do respect the hell out of this one, and it does definitely get exactly what makes the characters tick, and it puts that to good effect. Season 6, Episode 20, 2 Greyhounds. Santa's little helper lands the Simpsons with a new dog and 25 new puppies. However, after Mr. Burns steals the puppies, Bart and Lisa set out to get them back. So, some trivia is that Frank Welker was actually brought in to perform the animal noises for the episode. The best moment was the See My Best musical number. 4 out of 5 is what I give this one. This was obviously a 101 Dalmatians parody, but it didn't quite end up being that simple. They went to a few interesting places and actually referenced a few Disney movies along the way throughout the course of the episode. That is okie dokie with me though, because things such as the Beauty and the Beast homage is fantastic. I love how enthusiastic Mr. Burns is over his wardrobe of animal clothes. I mean, sure, it is ethically appalling, but that kind of fits so well with Mr. Burns. It does take a while to get to all of that exciting stuff though, because the first act is a bit slow moving. It does make me wish that they just gotten on with the main crux of the story a bit quicker, but I guess they didn't feel quite confident enough with the main concept to stretch it out for the whole runtime. The jokes are fine, Chief Brigham investigating the missing dogs is funny, but really Mr. Burns steals the show. Not just with his song and dance number, but with his famous Rory Calhoun line. I don't know why that works so well, but it just does. The ending is rather predictable though, and it was obvious that Burns was not actually going to kill Bart, Lisa and the dogs, but at least they foreshadowed the puppies liked socks, which ended up being their saviour. Sure, it is convenient, but how else are they going to write themselves out of that spot, I ask you? Overall, this was just a nice, fun little parody with a few classic lines and even a catchy song. Very enjoyable, if not particularly meaningful. Season 6, Episode 21. The PTA Disbands. The teachers at Springfield Elementary go on strike, which forces local Springfieldians to step in and take over the teaching positions. So some trivia is that the Lens showrunner David Merkin actually based much of this episode's script on his own experience as a child with schools running out of money. My best moment was the townspeople actually teaching the classes. This one was always going to be a 5 out of 5 in my book. It's just very entertaining. From watching Bart manipulate pretty much everyone in the town to seeing Lisa try to cope without school, there's never a dull moment here. The main story is pretty solid in that it takes the existing problem of the poor state of the school and just builds on it. Seeing the constant back and forth between Skinner and Edna Krabappel is interesting. They really do have some great chemistry together and make for great opponents in such a strike dispute. I especially love their little brief debate in front of the parent. In real life, it really can be hard to find the right balance between the budget and providing the necessary resources. That really is a surprisingly nice and precise piece of social commentary there. Also, the way in which it leads into the community becoming teachers is hilarious. Ned as the head of the PTA is genius in and of itself, but it's also a rare bit of continuity to last season's episode, Sweet Seymour Skinner's badass song. It's probably no coincidence that we see Leopold in these two episodes as well, who is always nice to see. My favourite scenes overall though were with Mo and Jasper and Professor Frink teaching the class. They're all just great. I must say though, the ending of this one is just so abrupt. I mean, in less than a minute, the differences are all resolved and the school just doubles up as a prison and all is well again. They basically make one joke about it and the credits roll. I definitely think the writers run out of airtime with that one. I can't forgive that though because the comedy really makes the episode stand out. I mean, you have the paddling line, the laws of thermodynamics, the screw the audience canon joke, I mean, I could go on and on. Season 6, Episode 22, Round Springfield. Leading Guns Murphy dies from an illness and leaves Lisa his saxophone. To honor him, Lisa raises $500 to purchase his record so it can be played on the radio. So this is actually the first time in which a recurring character was permanently killed off. He may not have been the most important character in the world, but hey, it's still a somewhat significant moment. The best moment for me was Bart buying the album for Lisa. So this one gets a 3 out of 5, and honestly, I kind of expected it to get that kind of rating coming in. This episode is very middle of the road for me. I mean, the idea of it is solid on paper, Lisa trying to learn to cope with loss, and finding a way to honour bleeding gums. They also managed to tie it back in well with Bart's story, as he uses his money from his court case against Krusty to help Lisa out. That is a nice touching little moment between them, and it again shows that when push comes to shove, the siblings are always there for each other. I must say though, I'm not the biggest Bleeding Gums Murphy fan in the world, and as such, I'm not particularly convinced of the emotional impact between him and Lisa they were going for. At least he got a good send-off though, I suppose, with him playing with Lisa one last time in the clouds. Sure, it was unrealistic, but who cares, right? I did not find this that funny though either. The only things I laughed at were the Mole Man radio station and Mr. Burns teasing Lisa with the bundle of money. That is quite cruel, even by Burns' standards. I don't really have too much else to say here. This was solid for the most part, but it's not an episode that I will rush back to watch again anytime soon. Season 6, Episode 23, The Springfield Connection. After chasing down a criminal, Marge gets a job as a cop. However, she soon discovers that the police department is filled with corruption. Some trivia here is that the title of this episode refers to the film The French Connection. The best moment for me is Chief Wiggum. Say no more. He really does nail all of the scenes that he is in. This one gets a 5 out of 5. So I guess this type of story is quite relevant and topical at the moment, with all the talk about policing and some of the incompetence and corruption within the force. This does touch on those issues a little, but more in short little jabs, which probably have more impact than centering a whole episode about that would have anyway. I think it is fair to say that Marge represents the well-meaning police officer quite well, someone who just wants to protect their community. It is a subtle way to show that that can cause conflicts with corrupt, high-ranking members. Regardless of that though, it was nice to see Marge in a more positive role, rather than settling for being a supportive role for someone else, which is unfortunately what she usually is. She wasn't no housewife here, she was a total badass. Obviously though, it would not last, as the way she ends up quitting is very obvious. Also, the point about Herman running the counterfeit jeans operation in their garage is not developed very well and it felt a bit rushed to me. Chief Wiggum steals the show though in terms of her laughs. From the laughing when Marge joins and quits the force, to ordering pizza like catching a criminal. Whenever he is on screen, it is entertaining, and provides a clear opposite to Marge. This may not be the most talked about episode of the show, but I feel it may be a tad bit underrated. As far as Marge-centric shows go, this is up there with one of the best, in my opinion. It offers a new side to her character, and plenty of funny jokes too, and even a bit of social commentary about the police for good measure. Season 6, Episode 24, Lemon of Troy. The children of Springfield wage war on Shelbyville after their beloved town lemon tree gets stolen. So, Homer's line, "No one in history has ever done anything this clever," that is a nod to the fact that Bart's plan is actually very similar to the Trojan horse strategy. The best moment for me was just the kids infiltrating Shelbyville. So let's get say 5 out of 5. Lemon of Troy has a simple plot when you get right down to it. Just a rivalry story between neighbouring towns that has the kids going on an adventure. Despite that though, I have to give it credit for just how well it is structured. You can tell that there was some thought put into this. There are many callbacks here, from the hoverbike setup to the Roman numerals. It even starts out with Marge giving that lecture about town pride, which of course sets the tone for the whole thing. The second act is not that eventful really, but it gets away with it by having some good character stuff with the kids. Millhouse Bar, and especially the pairing of Martin and Nelson, really does shine here. Even though it's kind of made clear that this whole fight between the neighbouring towns is kind of pointless, there's still enough action going on to add some much needed stakes. I mean, Bart almost got eaten by both a tiger and a guard dog here, for God's sake. In terms of the climax, it was the wise decision bringing the parents in on the action. It adds some more validity to the whole town history angle that they were going for. Also, Homer definitely adds a lot to this kind of story with the wacky stuff that he gets up to. I also love the ending with the different story told by the Shelbyville elder at the end. To be honest though, I don't know why anyone bought his story. I think I would rather a haunted lemon tree than turnip juice, personally. I will say that I considered giving this one a 4, but overall a solid plot which provided some much needed backstory to Shelbyville, combined with the decent jokes, elevated it to a 5. So finally we reach the end of Season 6, which proved to be the longest season so far. And it is Season 6 Episode 25, Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. Mr. Burns brings untold misery to many of Springfield's citizens, and is later found shot outside the City Hall. With them all having motives, every citizen in Springfield is treated as a suspect. So, some very well-known trivia about this one is that in the months following the broadcast to this episode, there was widespread debate as to who shot Mr. Burns. There was a contest held to guess, and the Vegas casinos even took bets on who did it. If you look it up online, you can actually find out images of the odds. I think Homer was favourite and then Smithers was second favourite, but it does go down a list of pretty much all the characters. It's quite interesting to look at really. The best moment was the town hall meeting. So right out of the gate, this is an obvious 5 out of 5 for me. And first things first, this is obviously an interesting one from a review perspective. This episode was clearly written as a cliffhanger, with the follow-up in Season 7 in mind. I'm not going to talk about or include Part 2 here though, for simplicity's sake. I'm just going to treat this episode and see if it stands on its own 2 feet like Rory Calhoun. Now, to say that this is iconic would be an understatement. Even people who don't watch the show have likely heard about this one. As for the content itself, it's basically one long stretch of motive scenes. They take it all very seriously, and you can sense the genuine, justified anger that the characters have. It all adds to the drama and the atmosphere. In fact, I would say that this is the best part of the whole thing. That is why I like the town hall scene so much, with everyone there stroking their guns. The tension in that room really is palpable, and the way that Mr. Burns shuts out the sun in front of everyone is quite the big moment. Speaking of Burns, he is of course the antagonist here, and he plays that role well. His evilness is amped up to the next level here, and his plans and genuine insanity enter into near supervillain territory, so much so that he kinda deserves what he gets in the end. This is not the funniest episode in the world, but This is not an episode which you would watch for its jokes, to be honest, and I rarely say that about a comedy show like The Simpsons. There were a few chuckle-worthy things, however, like Skinner with the newspaper headline, but ultimately the comedy is obviously not what makes this one great. The clues that are hidden here, like the candy from a baby one, Maggie staring straight on, and the clocks and the sundial, so on, they're all well foreshadowed and they're all well placed. It does add up to a very kind of genuine whodidit kind of mystery. And considering that barely any people actually guessed that Maggie was the one who did the shooting, the writers proved to be successful on that one. So that ends the season, and I'm afraid that if you want to see how I think they handled part 2 of this saga, you will have to wait for my season 7 review. Hey, don't blame me, I just cover these episodes in order after all. So, in conclusion for this season, the overall average score is 4.36, which is the highest so far, and you have to bear in mind that the clip show being a 1 drags that down hugely as well. Without that, you'd be looking at like 4.5, which is just crazy. The top 5 best episodes for me: Treehouse of Horror 5 was number 1, Lisa on Ice was number 2, Homer Badman was number 3, and Maggie Makes 3 was number 4, and Bart's Comet gets number 5. As you might expect though, there were so many good episodes in this season that this was the hardest top 5 to pick so far. Treehouse of Horror really does stand out as the best though, so that was always going to be number 1 for me. But Bart of Darkness, the PTA Disbands, Who Shot Mr. Burns, Sideshow Bob Roberts, those were all in consideration for the top 5. And to be honest, I think if this was any other top 5, those ones would be potentially in there. All in all, I can't really describe to you just how good this season is. The sheer consistency of it is quite staggering really. Other than the clip show, there's not a single dud among them. There's not a single episode I disliked. For those reasons, I would have to call this my personal favourite season of the show. I thought that coming into it, and watching them again just reaffirms that opinion. It really was right in the middle of The Simpsons' golden age, and it shows. They had everything down at this point, from the cast, to the writers, to the consistency. Everything was just brilliant at this stage. Now, saying that though, I do potentially think that other seasons like 4 or 5 arguably hit higher highs than this season overall, in regards to a few individual episodes. For example, Last Exit to Springfield in season 4 being my all-time favourite, but they also have more lackluster episodes offsets that difference. So this is not necessarily the funniest season in the world, but the consistency of it I think is the best. So yeah, all in all, it really was just a treat to sit down and watch this season again, which, as I stated before, was kind of the whole reason why I started up this project anyway. Any excuse to watch The Simpsons again, I'm quite happy with. So yeah, if anyone has the time to watch this classic season again, I encourage you to do so, because you will not be disappointed. Anyway, enough of me gushing, that concludes season 6. Join me next time for season 7, where it starts increasing the wacky factor for the series even further. Thank you for watching guys, see you next time, and take care.